we're not having a reading today. Instead, we'll begin presenting our address on the topic eternity. Don't worry, we won't take an eternity to do it. And we'll have a break in the middle for meditation and music.
My copy of the Universal English Dictionary gives 3 definitions of the word eternity. 1, duration, without beginning or end. 2, condition, which begins after earthly life, that state which will last forever, the next world. 3, a period of time which is so long that it appears endless. An example for the 3rd definition is given: these sermons seem to last an eternity. This dictionary defines forever as eternity.
And this is in complete contrast to the German theologian Hans Kung's concept of eternity. In his book Eternal Life, he writes that eternity is beyond the dimensions of space and time. It's not simply an endless further. It is something definitely new.
It is difficult to imagine something being beyond the dimensions of space and time. We first have to spend some time thinking about our concept of time. My dictionary says it is a fundamental conception involving recognition of the ideas before and after, past, present and future, in the sequence of events.
The Australian microbiologist Darryl Rennie wrote in his book The Death of Forever that animals are not aware of time. Awareness of time passing, a sense of self, a loss of innocence, these are related aspects of a phase transition that thousands of years ago changed us from beast to man. Echoes of this change persist in our myths. A deep-rooted myth tells us that our primal ancestors, Adam and Eve, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, wandered through the ancestral jungle, the Garden of Eden, like animals, without shame at being naked, until their eyes were opened by some shift of focus.
The myth tells us that God said to Adam and Eve that if they ate the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, they would surely die. Rennie believed that the myth arose once humans became aware of their own mortality. He wrote that awareness of death means awareness of time. It is only when human beings structure their thoughts in time, extending back through memory and forward through prediction, that they can foresee their own mortality. Rennie thought we are immersed in a time-obsessed culture. He wrote that we see the span of our lives like one-off investment that diminishes continuously, inexorably, with the ticking of the clock. After this, your account is running out of credit, and you can expect the banker to close the ledger. This creates in us a terrible sense of time pressing in, hounding us with a feeling of be quick before it's too late. Rennie believed that the concept of eternity is an inevitable reaction to the transience of life.
He wrote that from childhood onwards, the most commonly repeated experience, the most repetitive memory, is that night follows day in uniform sequence. We never experience a shutdown of this serial sequence, since when we die, our brains are not able to experience the stopping of the clock. Hence, our brains regard the future as open-ended, going on forever. And this is especially true when we're young, Rennie thought.
While there are many people who regard the concept of anything supernatural as being a kind of fairy story to comfort and often control people, particularly children, we all tend to think of physical time as something absolute, which will always exist. Rennie said that to think otherwise would be to challenge the basis of our thought processes.
And this must be why it's really hard to accept the idea that it's nonsense to ask the question, what was the universe like before the Big Bang? Cosmologists say there was no before. Time and space, as well as matter and energy, came into existence with this creation event. We think of time as being absolute, and this leads to another idea that goes against our experience of life, and that is that the rate at which time passes depends on an object's velocity relative to the speed of light and the strength of gravitational fields. An increase in either or both can slow the passage of time.
Yes, the concept of space-time at the core of Einstein's relativity theories is hard to accept. Wikipedia tells us that space-time is a coordinate system of three spatial dimensions: length, width and height, and a fourth dimension, time. There is a where and when of everything. Time is not independent of motion. Time and length are not absolute. They can change depending on motion. Something else that really challenges the basis of our thought processes is the concept of the universe coming to an end. Cosmologists say that either the universe will end in a big crunch after the force of gravity overcomes the expansion and contracts the universe down to the ultimate black hole, or it will expand forever till all the stars die out and atomic motion almost ceases as the temperature approaches absolute zero, that's minus 273 centigrade. In the heat death scenario, everything will be dark and cold and nothing will change. In either scenario, time as we know it will cease to exist. Darrell Reaney could give his book the title The Death of Forever, because he wrote in it that the assumption of an open-ended future is denied by the laws that govern physical reality. In real time, there is no forever. There never was.
But Reaney does not see eternity as being in real time. He, like Hans Kung, does not think eternity means forever. In his book Eternal Life, Kung writes that eternal life is not a continuation of this life in space and time. It is misleading to speak of after death. Eternity is not defined in terms of before or after. What it means is a new life beyond the dimension of space and time in God's invisible, imperishable, incomprehensible domain. It's not simply an endless further. And that reminds me of the statement about there being no such thing as time before the Big Bang. Reaney wrote that time is a fictional map we draw on the seamless space-time fabric so that we can find our way around.
He said that our sense of serial passing of time, which we take for granted as an axiomatic feature of the real world, is very much a construction of our own minds, a feature of neuropsychology, not physics. In The Death of Forever, Reaney wrote that the human brain was the first brain in evolution to sense the serial passage of time, the first brain to learn to predict events from experience. Also, it was the first brain to foresee its own end. The end, not of the species, which goes on, but of the individual, which does not. It is the individual's powerful sense of identity of I am, which fears extinction.
Reaney said that our sense of self is inextricably linked to our sense of time. When we wake up in the morning, we organise our thoughts around our personal expectations of what will happen to us. We have the ability to project forward in time. And until very recently, it was considered that animals do not have this ability. However, I read about a chimpanzee which calmly collects rocks in the morning and later in the day hurls them angrily at zoo visitors. Now, he must be able to plan ahead. Yeah. Anyway, Reaney pointed out how planning ahead and remembering are linked with a point of central reference, the I, or the sense of self. Being able to both remember and plan allows us to have ideas. Our sense of time is a mental map by which we order our memories. Reaney explained that in hunter-gatherer societies, the community was more important than the individual, and everyone was bound by a sense of shared experience. But after writing had been invented, and people began living in cities, the concept of property developed. City life also opened up a new dimension of human awareness, symbolic thought, the capacity to have new ideas for dealing with novel situations.